Welcome to the Personal Finance Professional Podcast. I'm Molly Birchall, Communications Executive for the Personal Finance Society. In this episode, I'll be talking to Lee Coates, Rebecca Kowalski, and Ian Simons. In this episode of the podcast, we're discussing the sustainable finance knowledge gap. I'm joined by Lee Coates OBE, Director at ESG Accord, Rebecca Kowalski, Director at Overstory Finance, and Ian Simons, Content and Capabilities Director for the CII. Here is my conversation with Lee, Rebecca, and Ian. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Ian, did you want to kick off the podcast with explaining exactly what the Sustainable Finance Advice Panel is and its aims?
Sure, yeah. The PFS Sustainable Finance Advice Panel is a group of sustainable finance experts facilitated by the PFS to enhance advice standards and consumer outcomes around climate change and other sustainability challenges. It was created in 2023 and chaired by Don McIntyre, and includes both Rebecca and Lee. And the group started with a focus on education and awareness, hence the research that we're talking about today, and aims to more broadly provide guidance on CII qualification materials, develop new training, and ultimately develop standards on sustainable finance for the whole sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. And Rebecca, could you tell us why the panel decided to survey members to assess their sustainable knowledge?
Sure. So we've been meeting for a little while, but this is one of the first external activities, I suppose. So we prepared the survey so that we could shape the support and the content that we're going to deliver for members to make sure that it's relevant for everybody and inclusive, regardless of whether somebody is a complete beginner or kind of on their journey towards becoming an expert, possibly. We wanted to make sure that we were kind of responding to people's specific needs. A lot of the stuff that we talk about when we talk about sustainable finance with advisors is that they need to listen to their clients' preferences and needs. So I guess we're trying to do the same here for advisors. And we wanted to assess where the baseline is really, because the aim is to improve standards of advice in this space. So we really had to know at what level people are already at. So it's been helpful that way, I think. So.
Brilliant. Thank you. And sticking with you then, Rebecca, would you be able to sort of explain what sustainable finance advice is and the difference between that and ESG?
Yeah, okay. So I think there's two main points to bring out there. Lee may well want to add to this as well, but I think initially, there's the kind of difference on an investment level between ESG and sustainability, which has become quite confused over the last few years. And I ideally hope that the SDR labels are going to help sort that out a bit. So I think, some people prefer to use sustainability as their kind of umbrella term, and some people use responsible and some people use ESG. And then it became kind of mixed as to what they all meant, which we can touch on at some point if we get to it. But so there's that confusion. I think with the fact the FCA is now leading with sustainability in the labels, that you'll perhaps see a bit of a kind of move away from ESG towards sustainability in some regards. But also, we've adopted the term sustainable financial advice because we're very much leading for advice professionals, for financial advisors and paraplanners and all their team members, not, just from an investment industry point of view. So we want to look at not just sustainable investments and ESG investments, but how financial planning practitioners can be sustainable across everything that they do in the way that they plan for clients, do financial planning models for clients, cover all the risks involved with sustainability, the opportunities, run their businesses. So it's a lot more than just whether you prefer an ESG investment or a sustainable or an ethical or whatever it might be. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Lee, or...
Well, yeah, basically, I would just reinforce what you've just said. It's about client choice. And from a regulatory perspective, if an advisor doesn't know what their clients' preferences are in relation to sustainability or values-based investment, then it's difficult to be able to see how they could claim good client outcomes, because the solution they build is based on information they don't have. So asking the question is absolutely critical. And also talking about sustainability doesn't mean the client has to invest sustainably. You can have a meaningful conversation about sustainability with a client simply from a risk point of view. And so you've got risk, but also you've got opportunity. So you'd have to be the most diehard climate change denier and so committed to your denial that you would also not want to profit from the trillions of dollars that's going in to solve climate change, the thing you don't believe in. So even if you don't believe in it, without being fundamentalist, you can still say, I don't believe in it, it's a load of old rubbish, but as long as everybody else believes in it, as long as everybody else is putting trillions of dollars into solutions, can I invest in some of that, please?
Okay, yeah, that's good.
It isn't about being sustainable. It's about making money. It's being a good old capitalist.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I'd never thought of it in that way. And so based on the report, Ian, would you be able to tell us a few key findings?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, overall, at a high level, the report shows there is a good general awareness of ESG, sustainable or value-based advice, but that it's not consistent, or the way that individuals or firms do that isn't yet consistent. And that's not surprising or necessarily a big negative to focus on, because, of course, we are in a really rapid development phase. So we don't want to just focus on negatives, because you could highlight individual findings, like only 4 in 10 firms include ESG, sustainable and values-based investment knowledge as part of their training and compliance regime, which on its own sort of implies that 6 in 10 aren't, which could be the case. But also, I didn't want to lose the wider context, which is probably that those firms and individuals are on a journey, as we all are, and it's possibly more about how well that learning, which might be done at an individual level, how well it can be documented and incorporated within that T&C regime. So it was really important in the way that we asked the questions that it covered all types of firms and all practitioners, and doesn't just start with an assumption that all firms will have a really robust compliance function that follow a common format, but that everyone's on a journey and will need to apply it differently. So overall, it definitely highlights there's plenty of room for improvement, but there's also not a reason to panic. As Rebecca was saying earlier, the purpose of the research is really to help us get a baseline on where the priorities are or where people feel they need the most help. And then that's where the PFS as a membership body can help over time add to our CPD, add to our guidance, etc., to support people. So it's really important to get that right balance between what are opportunities to improve and opportunities for us to support, rather than individual findings, which hopefully we plan to repeat this at a later phase. It gives us plenty of opportunities to see where we are later in the journey. If we come back to this in 6 months or a year's time, I would hope to see some of those numbers improve, but they'll certainly give us a new area to focus on.
Amazing, thank you. And then building on the findings, what can individual members do to improve their knowledge and ability to provide sustainable financial advice?
I suggest Rebecca's probably better at that, answering that. Being not a practitioner myself, I wouldn't want to put words in people's mouths.
Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, so in some ways I might be a good person to answer that one. In other ways, the fact that I'm a complete geek for this stuff, I might not be the best example. But I mean, the trouble, I think, with this space is it can get enormous. You open a door and you find out one thing, and then you ask more questions and you want to learn more. And I'm terrible for that. I'm learning new things that are happening in the world of sustainability and sustainable finance constantly. But I think for the person who wants to be a kind of general practitioner, maybe rather than an expert, they need to be a little bit organized at the start about their learning and figure out what are their desired outcomes and their objectives in their career and their ability to help clients or to grow their business or whatever the objective might be, and figure out what they need to learn to deliver that. And a lot of it is going to be based around whatever investment solutions that they or their firm decide to deliver, because whether it's sustainable or not, in this day of consumer duty, you need to know your products and services and how to figure out whether they're suitable for clients or not, inside out and upside down. So that's the key thing. But I think when it comes to underlying knowledge of climate change science and all the other issues to do with sustainability and economics and all those other things, personally, I think it's fascinating. For some people, it's going to be quite daunting. If you don't want to build up huge expertise in that yourself, I would recommend that everybody has access to an expert somewhere in their firm or in their external consultants or whatever to make it more manageable. And I also think that quite a lot of the information in this space is not necessarily always black and white, and there's one right or wrong answer. So you maybe need to find your own position, because clients will want you to seem confident in this space, even if that's based on a little bit of knowledge or a lot of knowledge. And I think you have to be honest with clients about where you set the boundaries of your knowledge. And, you can almost even use the labels to say, I'm improving in this space, or I'm focused on this area, or whatever your capabilities and limitations are. The worst thing is always to pretend that you know something that you don't know. But again, I think Lee will have some interesting stuff to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that last point, being honest and open with clients is absolutely critical. But from a professional's perspective, it's really incumbent upon the advisor to be up to speed with their knowledge of what's available. And sustainability is no longer the other. In other words, it's not something that's parked and is only sort of comes out really if the client mentions it or something. It is an integral part of the financial advice process, and therefore knowledge on that subject is absolutely critical. It's exactly the same as having a conversation about pensions with a client, and halfway through the conversation, the advisor stopping and going, how much do you know about this? Because I don't know anything. So hopefully an advisor wouldn't say that. Neither would they embark on an advice process incorporating pensions. And sustainability is no different. You really need to understand the options. As I said earlier, if nothing more, then there are significant opportunities out there for you to make money. That's why you've come to me as an advisor. And I know where to look.
Can I just add to that as well? Sorry, not as a practitioner, but just observing and having listened to Rebecca and Lee and other members of the panel talk about it. One of the other findings that I think stood out for me from research was that it's not just about technical knowledge, but also the skills of being able to listen. In the conversation Lee was just outlining there, the ability to spot your clients' interests, even if they're not verbalized, or to be able to sort of work around a question when it's not just straight off a checklist. Their skills, whether it's coaching, whether it's listening, etc., that I think are equally important as knowing all of the different technical definitions or whatever else goes into it. And I'm not suggesting, obviously, as a CII, that the technical knowledge isn't important, but that I think just focusing on that is equally a risk of not having the wider skills to apply them.
Yeah, I guess you never know what you're going to need, do you? It's a little bit like, learning your green cross code or highway code, but, the sign that stops you from having the accident is going to be the important one. But it's still good to know that all the others are there. And also to be able to kind of condense all that stuff, and communicate it in a way that it doesn't put clients off, that you still keep it accessible and manageable and steer the clients according to how deep they want to go into preferences and choices as well. So yeah, definitely some skills, I think, there too.
And so with all this in mind, do all firms and advisors need to be able to provide sustainable financial advice? Lee, did you want to kick us off first?
Yeah, okay. I suppose the very short answer to that is no. Now, there's a massive caveat to that, which is that if advisors don't want to offer advice in that area, then they need a formal declaration on their website and at the beginning of every conversation with a new and existing client to say, I don't have the skills and competence to be able to talk about this. So if you need advice in this space, I suggest you talk to another firm. Assuming that is never going to happen, then the answer is yes. every single advisor needs to build a discussion around sustainability into the advice process. It's not negotiable. It's you cannot meet consumer duty without having a conversation, even if 99% of the clients say, sounds a bit woke, not for me, can't be bothered, move on. As long as that conversation is recorded and is referenced in the suitability letter, I'm not building sustainability into your portfolio as you requested, absolutely fine. But without the conversation, I said earlier, without the conversation, it's impossible to prove under consumer duty that you have delivered good outcomes if there's no evidence the conversation took place, even in that example of 99% of the clients saying, nah, can't be bothered. Don't like it, don't understand it, not for me. It's not the advisor's job to filter out what the client may or may not want. Their job is to know the client. Back to basic Cobbs and Prod principles. Understand what your client needs and ask the right questions at the right time in the right way to make sure you actually know who your client is.
Great. And what is the link with greenwashing and the new sustainable disclosure requirements rules?
Well, the new SDR rules that introduced the labels that Rebecca referred to, they also brought in a lovely little thing called the anti-greenwashing rules. Now, the interesting thing about SDR and anti-greenwashing is that SDR, for obvious reasons, refers to the labels, which are an investment proposition. But anti-greenwashing affects every single regulated firm in the UK. So even giving mortgage advice, anti-greenwashing applies. So if a client wants to retrofit eco-efficient heating in their house and borrow money to do that, the advisor needs to make sure that from an anti-greenwashing perspective, they're not making claims in their advice or around the lending that they can't be substantiated. But in the investment side of things, I always ask advisors to look at two things, the front and back end. The front end is what your website says. Make sure that you are not making claims that can't be substantiated, and make sure that whatever you write in your suitability letter is agnostic in terms of its claims. It really should only be specifying exactly what the portfolio is aimed to deliver, and anything softer around that. Thank you for choosing sustainability. I built a portfolio that will save the planet. That could be contested at any point in the future by the client to say, I've made these investments, they're 5 years old, and I don't feel the planet's been saved. Might be pushing it a bit, but that would be a really good example of anti-greenwashing. So you asked for a sustainable portfolio. I built a sustainable portfolio. We'll keep reviewing this on an annual basis to make sure it stays in line with your values, etc. That's a fact. Try not to embellish, because there's a risk that you could be caught by the anti-greenwashing rules. Just finally on the anti-greenwashing, the positive side is that for years we've heard from advisors about product providers over-claiming, over-emphasizing their sustainability credentials. And so probably the biggest impact will be on providers in terms of what they actually say advisors can pretty much rely on. I mean, there's never 100% reliable thing. There needs to be some checking, but certainly we move from the sort of pre-anti-greenwashing era of very much Wild West. Yeah, we've got the best sustainability team. Yes, we know more about sustainability than anyone else. Introduce money to our sustainable fund. Those days are gone. It's now all about, this is what we deliver, this is how we do it, and here's the evidence.
Brilliant, thank you. And how do advisors balance the need for providing sustainable financial advice and investment performance?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's, I think, quite a topical one at the moment as well, because the performance has been a little bit off for some obvious reasons recently, because kind of the most unsustainable firms are the ones that have been doing well. But I had a few points I wanted to make on this. I think one of the first ones is maybe this is quite a systems change type way of thinking, but I think as an industry, we're all a little bit too inclined to just assume that what every client wants is the maximum return possible at any price. And I think that the whole way we deliver our service and the way we kind of compare investment returns and make kind of investment performance front and center of all our annual reviews and things like that kind of leads us to problems in that area. I think that there's an argument for looking more at absolute returns rather than relative returns and thinking about what a client actually needs, which very much feeds into proper financial planning and doing cash flow modeling and working out how much you need to save for your retirement to get the amount of money you need when you retire, etc. And none of these things obviously are set in stone, and you're going to have regular meetings with clients to assess whether you've delivered the returns that they need, whether they are from a sustainable portfolio or any other portfolio, which is a great way to discuss trade-offs and decide if the client's on the right track and explore how they actually feel about the various risks and returns that they're receiving from their investment. So I would start with that question to just absolutely consider whether maximum performance at all times is the main thing you want to base your service on, because it's quite hard for everybody to control, to be honest. And I think the kind of relationship and the trust is a more important thing that you have more control over. I think it's also not just about performance and returns, it's also about risk and costs. And I know that many advisors would then say, well, sustainable portfolios are more risky because they cut out some of the investment choices that you could have, and they can cost more potentially. But there's been some surveys recently run by the FCA that suggest that a lot of clients would be prepared to accept more risk, would be prepared to pay a little bit more for sustainable portfolios if they had to. I'm not saying they definitely would. So again, I don't think we should just automatically assume that that's a complete no-no. I think most advisors know which of their clients are the ones who are very returns driven, the ones who are kind of comparing whether you've managed to achieve as much as their little personal share portfolio has achieved and things like that. And maybe for them, you need to be aware that that's a priority for them. But I don't think that that's the case for everybody. But I think as well, we really have to start looking more long-term than short-term, because there will always be times when a sustainable portfolio will underperform or overperform depending on market cycles and economic trends. And we have to kind of look more at the long-term investment case, and particularly when we're talking about long-term retirement funding and things like that, and the risks of not being sustainable. We don't talk about them as much as the risks of being sustainable, and they are huge. I read something the other day about, which was new to me, that I think 90% of a portfolio return typically comes from the market, what the market does, not individual stock selection. It's the beta part of the portfolio. And you might invest in, shall we say, an oil company that's delivering fantastic returns and wonderful dividends, but what effect is it having on the rest of on the other kind of 90% of your portfolio? How is that potentially damaging the market? Because if we keep having more and more climate change, it literally puts the whole financial system at risk. So there's quite a lot of things to, bigger picture things to consider there. But having said that, that isn't to say that I don't think that if a well-constructed sustainable portfolio has a pretty good chance of delivering as good returns and risk profile as any other portfolio, if it's put together well, if the client understands all the kind of trade-offs and adjustments you've made to deliver both sustainability and financial returns. So I kind of understand people's concerns about that, but it's not really just sustainable portfolios that have disappointed a lot recently. The kind of all kinds of investments have too. And I think a lot of it is down to the system, not just the sustainable preference, so.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And finally, Ian, what is the PFS going to do to support members with their sustainable financial advice challenges?
Thank you. So first of all, we're going to carry on listening and carrying on doing. I mean, the reason we set up the panel was to make sure that we were listening and not just looking inwardly. So it was less about making sure there's just always something on our CPD program, and more about, is that something the most relevant thing and the most applicable thing to our members at any one time, and how else should we be supporting members? So we've already talked about where our qualifications materials need to be kept up to date or broadened out or made more consistent to make sure we've got really clear, sustainable financial advice direction across the learning side of what we offer. And beyond that, not for those who are still taking qualifications, but how do we help signpost relevant other resources? We've just launched a new member sustainable finance hub on the PFS website, where we're going to be adding more and more stuff, not just existing PFS materials. So yes, that's all on there. Any webinars that we've done in the past are all on there. Any guidance that we've produced is all on there. This research paper is on there, and once it's recorded, this podcast will be on there. But also we're committed to continuing to add to that, not just with PFS materials, but other relevant resources, tools, research, guidance that we believe is useful to members. And that's something that the panel is helping us make sure is only good quality, relevant materials going to go on there. Obviously, we don't swamp it, and it can't become something where it's sort of pay to play. This is very much a open source support hub. So it's a real commitment at a broad level to try and achieve that improvement in standards. So exactly what we do will change over time. So hopefully once we really get to the bottom of the research, what it's just told us, and we start providing support and guidance where we're being told it's most needed, then it's the commitment to then say, right, where does the focus next need to be? Does it need to be in actually writing up and documenting some explicit standards, or is it more around working with the FCA, for example? And the FCA attend the panel in an observing capacity, but they've also just set up their own advisors sustainability group on which John McIntyre is also representing PFS members. So our interaction with the regulator and support of how advisors can best meet their clients' needs within a regulatory context is another critical one for how we look forward, and not just provide some passive technical knowledge, but more about applying that within the practical lens. So it's very much a future focus. I'm quite excited to be part of it. I'm learning a lot every day, but it's much more about hopefully what our members need. And I would say there's a real open door on that sustainable finance hub. There's a request for members to let us know what they need. So if you've got an idea of something that is missing, something that we can help create, just let us know. It's we can't promise to be able to do everything, but we're certainly committed to listening and trying. So let us know, and we'll do our best to try and support anything that's reasonable that members need.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Sounds like you've got a lot going on. Is there anything that anyone else would like to add before we end the podcast?
I did have a little quote. It's maybe a bit of a spur to action for advisors out there. It's a quote from Sir James Bevan, the former head of the UK Environment Agency. And it says, throughout history, the most important and disruptive changes have gone through the same cycle. First, they are unthinkable. Then they look impossible. After that, they begin to become feasible. And then they start to happen slowly at first, then all at once. So I believe that gives us 5 stages of unthinkable, impossible, feasible, slow start, and all at once. And if we look at the world out there and government policy, what's happening in society, I think we're probably mainly at number 4. We're kind of at a slow start of making the changes we need to make to be sustainable. But I think amongst the advisor community, we still have some people who are like, unthinkable, can't change, not going there. Some who think, well, maybe, but have no idea how, so still impossible. Some think it's feasible and maybe waiting for the labels to get started. A few are making a slow start. A few brilliant individuals are already at level 5. But I think what it shows is that we've got quite a bit of catching up to do just to kind of get level with what's going on in the real world.
Brilliant. Thank you. So thank you, Lee, Rebecca and Ian for joining me on the podcast today. It was really interesting to find out about the current knowledge gap in its sustainable finance and what the PFS is doing to support the members.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Ian for all his hard work and everybody else involved at the PFS too. It's great to have this committee going on. So.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Personal Finance Professional Podcast. For more podcasts and useful links, visit pfp.thepfs.org /podcasts. Until next time, goodbye.